right. So it looks like we are ready. Let me just check here. All right. Welcome, all of you. And thank you to Yin Zhan for organizing today's episode or today's installment of the Sociology Workshop series. Sorry, let me just get my bearings here. I got a lot of windows going. My name is Joe Cohen, and this is a joint presentation between the Queen's College Sociology Workshop and the Queen's Podcast Lab Educational Series. So welcome to everybody who's coming from either. Today we're going to talk about fame and celebrity, and it's part of a bigger project that I'm doing with some colleagues on podcasting and content creation entrepreneurship. What I'm presenting today is it's like a theory paper that's based on some of the research that I have been doing with two colleagues, Ryan Sperry, who's here today, and also Jason Tuga. Ryan has been in the interview portions. Jason has helped me run the podcast lab, and I'll talk about all of that in just a moment. Before I start, let me just make a few announcements. If I can find the, I want to make a couple of announcements before we get started. All right. Just is the slide showing, guys? You got the slide here? All right. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So join us this Friday. We're going to have a discussion about the writing business. If you've ever dreamed of being an author or taking the leap into publishing, we have two great experts who are going to come in to tell us about the writing business. Our very own Dana Weinberg, whose work on digital publishing gained national media attention. She's also an author herself, and her early work on digital publishing set the groundwork for her big time DoD project that she's working on right now. And we're also going to meet Clayton Childress, who was author of the ASA Culture Section's award-winning book, Between the Covers. He's from the University of Toronto, and he's an expert on the publishing business, the creative aspects. And we're just going to talk about writing. That's this Friday. And then after that, in the following week, join us for a discussion with Hannah Wohl from UC Berkeley. Hannah has written another acclaimed book on creativity, and we're going to talk to her about it. What is it? How is it harnessed? Yeah. You're not going to want to miss it. Barbara, I'm just going to get you to do that there. We have a couple more events in our fall learning series, the fall installment of this. And I hope you can join us. And if this type of stuff interests you, join our email list, queenspodcastlab.substack.com, and you can get information on all of our programming. All right. And so without any further delay, let's get started talking about today's topic, which is fame and celebrity. As you might imagine, this is a topic that draws a lot of interest from the young people that we come into contact with who aspire to careers in media and the arts. And it's also a topic that a lot of our respondents are interested in too, practicing podcasters, practicing creators, as well as aspiring ones. And you can see why, fame for some of them, it's part of the dream that they're pursuing when they get into content creation. But a lot of people enjoy it as an object of contemplation that informs their practice as content creators. There's something about the world of fame and celebrity that speaks to the task of running a communication-centric enterprise. And so our goal in this paper is to create a framework that gives a social science informed view of the workings of fame and celebrity, which is the take on the topic that interests the people we're working with, and maybe comment on how our work, our research, might refine some views or might add some extra vantage points on the topics of fame. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Before talking about fame and celebrity itself, though, I want to take a moment to provide some background for this paper. This work is part of a larger project that engages a huge shift in our information and cultural diets. 20 years ago, we got all of our information from legacy media that were large scale mass communications enterprise. We got information from the newspaper. We got information from television, from radio. And in the past 2 decades, what's happened is there's been a technological change in communications media, and it has changed where we go to get our information, where we go to be entertained, and where we get our culture. And now what's happened is a lot of our attention has migrated to what's called platform medias or Web 2.0 platforms. Instead of a TV channel that curates or produces its own programming and delivers it to you, the new media firms, what they do is they create a platform that allow users to upload their own videos. And these types of platforms are, I'm sure you recognize in yourself, that's where your attention has gravitated over the past several years, and it's changing our information and communicative environment. And the shift, we've talked about the shift in terms of, people have talked about it in terms of culture, and the political impact of things like Facebook are up for discussions, but these new media and their workings are also of great interest to communications occupations in fields like marketing, entertainment, and things like that. There are a lot of students who aspire to careers in these fields. Employers value the ability to work with these platforms, and research on these media educational programs are in early stage development. And partly what we're trying to do here is lay down the groundwork for some academic programming or some work that speaks to people who want to become content creators. And we have collaborators in other parts of the university. Media Studies has some programming that's developing. English has some programming, and next spring, Sociology is going to launch a content creation entrepreneurship seminar and be part of it. And we're very excited about it. I don't talk about methods in the main body of the research, but I know that it's of interest to colleagues. And so the subject matter presented here is based on a mixed method study that I'm running. And basically it has 2 components. There is a field experiment component where we created a podcast network. It's been running for 5 years. We've developed, we train people. We have learned to work the IT. We've developed a program. And one of our podcasts has even spent a stint for several months as a top 20 science podcast in the United States. That's the Annex. And it ends up being a field experiment where we've learned a lot about how these media work by actually doing it. The second part of the project, we've been interviewing successful podcasters. Ryan is part of this project. And Ryan, you should chime in if you have anything to add on any of this. You've seen the same evidence, even though Ryan's working on different topics. But what we've done is we've done a random sampling off of iTunes subgenre national charts. So we look for nationally ranked podcasts, and we sample. We talk to people who've had at least 100 podcasts and are nationally ranked on a chart. That, and through the podcast, we've gotten in touch with a lot of experts whose areas of expertise overlap with content creation. We've learned from them. So that's the empirical basis, or the primary research basis of the material you're going to hear today. But the presentation here is more of a general audience geared one that tries to speak to content creators as well. So with all of that, let's get on to the actual topic. Just interrupt if you have, interrupt if you have any questions or comments over the course. We're going to start by talking about celebrity. What is it? How to get it? How to use it? And how to keep it. Andy Warhol once said, in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. Now, the quip's attributed to Warhol, even though there's some dispute as to whether or not he coined it. It was on a program of a show of his, an exhibition in 1968 out in Sweden. But whoever penned the quote, it gained tremendous cultural resonance. Hold up. It gained tremendous cultural resonance in the 70s and 80s. I mean, we've all heard the quote. It's a good quote. And the quote, and a lot of Warhol's work, resonates with a view that celebrity is something that's becoming mass-produced, manufactured, cheap. Often there's discussions about celebrity, and you see people say, oh, there are so many people who are famous for being famous or famous for nothing. And a lot of people see this new breed of celebrity and the attention we pay to them, and they take it as a sign of dysfunction in society. It's a decline in our character, or something that is otherwise not great. Now, Warhol's observation was made, and the traction that the quote gained, what happened in a very specific historical context. And it was a period in which mass communications technology was evolving in ways that made new forms of communication possible and new cultural production enterprises more viable. In the 70s and 80s, there was a shift towards mass communications media that allowed people to consume programming on a personal level, like without other people. There were more televisions. The Walkman came out, car radios and cassette players, portable audio like boom boxes. And so one change that occurred in the 70s and 80s was broadcast consumption or media consumption. A lot of it moved out of the family room and into people's personal spaces. And that allowed for new forms of consumption, right? It might be that the whole family doesn't want to watch an episode of Jackass on MTV, or the whole family doesn't want to listen to a shock jock, or consume pornography. But when personalized consumption was more viable, those types of products gained traction. Another change that happened was that there were new media developing that circumvented both legal and informal regulations of culture. So, for example, cable TV and satellite TV allowed adult programming to be broadcast on TV, whereas that wasn't allowed on broadcast TV over the airwaves. Video cassettes and cassette tapes enabled new forms of music to be distributed, music that wouldn't be sold or carried by a record label, but was easy enough for people to develop grassroots markets for. So the point that and what happened here was these new media created new cultural outlets and new forms of culture. And when people looked at them, they were different from what they had seen before. And some people were left asking, what is this garbage? What is this pornography on television? What's this rap music? Who's this idiot on FM radio? Why is this popular? And at the time, there were a lot of debates about censorship. Fast forward 20 years, and our era is like that on steroids. Whatever communication affordances were created by things like cable TV or cassette tapes is now it's exponentially larger over the internet. The internet is created like an almost unlimited pipeline of content, and it's almost impossible to regulate. And technology has evolved so that people with next to no technical knowledge or specialty equipment or money can set up broadcast outlets that command audiences that are the size of what commercial audiences drew in past eras. Like, for example, at our peak on my podcast, we were getting about 1,200 listeners a week for a 1-hour program. That's like a drive home audience for a radio station in a mid-sized city. Like, it's one person on a shoestring budget bringing in audiences that used to be commanded by media enterprises. And so what's happened is all sorts of new content has become available, and all of us have or media audiences have fragmented. We're now, whereas once we might have all watched the same set of shows or listened to the same announcers, watched the same news, now our media diets are becoming more individuated. We have a distinct media diet, even from the people we live with and our close friends. We follow different Facebook groups. We follow different people on Twitter. We like different YouTube videos. We, tune into different blogs. And that process where everybody's tuning into a different mix of producers is called audience fragmentation. So what's happened is there's a lot more content, a lot more media outlets, and we're dividing our attention between it. And so what happens is there is now a much larger universe of small scale celebrities who are delivering content that was once unconventional. And so the Andy Warhol observation of just fame looking cheap or mass produced or easy because we're seeing so much of it, it's now much more like that. And it's an interesting, this development is interesting in a lot of ways. It gives us a space for probing concepts of fame and celebrity, seeing how they've changed, making note of this new environment and thinking through the concepts. Are there any questions at this point, or should I move on? All right. So let's start off with some basic concepts. First, what's fame? Who are celebrities? Now, if you look at the etymology of these words, you find that they're rooted in 13th century, 14th century Latin terms, denoting reputation or public opinion. And that meaning is carried over into the literature on the topic. If you read up on fame, it's used in general to denote a person who is known by strangers, or fame itself is renowned by strangers. It happens when people who you don't know, they recognize you. They know, they have information of you. They might have feelings or opinions of you. They're relating to you as a person, even though they don't know you personally. And when one person knows many people like that, they have fame. And a person who possesses fame is celebrity. Now, fame can occur on different levels. There are people who are very, very famous, like Tom Hanks or the president of the United States. But fame can go down to local levels where, for example, people in a small town know the local weatherman, or even people in New York City know who the weatherman is on New York 1. And it even happens, for example, a microcosm of that happens on college campuses, where a lot of students might know a large lecturer professor, right? And it's a situation where there's that asymmetry. Many people know one person. One person is known to many people. Now, on the surface, this might strike you as obvious or an uninformative definition, but conceptualizing it of this way has a lot of benefits. One is it allows you to recognize fame that doesn't resonate with you personally, because one of the problems in studying fame is that our sense of fame is highly personalized. And as researchers, we need objective standards. There is a tendency, I'll get to it. Let me move forward and I'll get to it. So one way to probe what's meant by a concept is to look at how researchers measure it. And the way celebrity has been measured has evolved over recent decades, but there's still a common core, common meaning that's being captured. Now, before the internet, usually people used sales data as a proxy for fame. So, for example, if Will Smith were to star in a movie, they'd see whether a Will Smith movie drew a lot. And if Will Smith's movies draw a lot, they infer that he's a star. Now, that happened with smaller and medium-sized media enterprises in particular, because sales data, they had to collect it for accounting purposes. But back in the day, a lot of the more detailed knowledge that big enterprises had was developed using social scientific research methods, just like the kind we teach here at Queen's College. And in fact, a lot of media research has its roots in sociology through work, especially by Paul Lazarsfeld, is well known in that era. And they did what we do. They ran focus groups, they ran surveys, and they would find ways to quantify celebrity. And here's an example of that on the screen. This is called a Q score. It's still being put out. And what it is it's made by running surveys and asking panels of respondents to rate whether or not they recognize a celebrity and how they feel about celebrities. And this is Q scores from 2017. It's for national morning TV anchors. So as you see here, recognizability, like we said, part of celebrities just being known to their people. And you can see there are morning announcers like Kathy Lee Gifford or Al Roker, George Stephanopoulos, who are very widely known. And then there's affect, like a positive Q score. This is how much people like the celebrity. So people like Kathy Lee Gifford might be well liked or widely known, but not well liked. Whereas people might not know Robin Roberts is well known, but people who know Sam Champion or Josh Elliott seem to like him. Now, with the internet, our ability to measure fame has grown considerably. We were able to move from self-reports to behavioral data rather than asking people who they like, asking people if they paid attention to a celebrity. We could just see who they surfed for. We could see, who they followed on Facebook, where they clicked. And so what's happened is we've built a much more enriched capacity for quantifying fame. And there's a lot of efforts going on to find ways to put better numbers on celebrities. And it's also created a lot of knowledge in the celebrity space. They know that. And now there's a lot of efforts to game that system, either by purchasing followers, hiring algorithms to make it look like more people share your stories or click on your links and things like that. Now, even though the methods have changed, there's still the same basic insight that they're getting at. How widely someone is known, what do people know of them, and how do people feel about them? So times have changed. The methods we use to measure it have changed, but it has a timeless core, renowned to strangers and the feelings associated with it. Now, if you're a fan of morning TV, you might have been surprised to see how low some of the name recognition is among well-known TV celebrities, right? You might be surprised that not a lot of people know who George Stephanopoulos is. We in sociology might be really surprised to hear that nobody knows who Robert Merton is outside of our discipline. And part of it is that fame exists in a field. It's like a sphere of discourse, a sphere of attention where a person is relevant. So fame exists where people pay attention to the area of discussion or action where the celebrity is relevant. And people who don't pay attention to that, the celebrity might as well be anybody else. Their fame is not fungible. It doesn't have an impact. So, for example, if you're a baseball fan, you know who Mike Trout is. You might want Mike Trout to meet your child or grandchild. You might invite Mike Trout, to speak to the community. But if you don't know who Mike Trout is, well, then Mike Trout might as well be Salman Khan or Dilmurat, who are two far, far bigger stars who I'm guessing most of you have never heard of because they operate in a space where your attention doesn't gravitate. And even though for example, that Salman Khan is very famous, because I've told you so, you might not be moved emotionally because, it's not meaningful to you. You're not invested in the space where Salman Khan does work, and so his celebrity it doesn't have an impact on you. But where you do pay attention to the field, if you do know baseball, then you're more likely to know of Mike Trout, click on an ad, listen to his opinion, and all that. All right. All right. Now, what has happened with this fragmentation of us all paying attention to smaller audiences is there's been a new breed of what are called micro celebrities. So whereas a lot of our celebrities might have been followed by very large audiences, a lot of people who are celebrities today are in the celebrity business. I'll explain what that is in a second. They often cater to small audiences in the tens of thousands, and like sociology is included in that. Our most famous people are playing to audiences of tens of thousands. And in that sense, they're micro celebrities, just like all the niche podcasters that Ryan and I have been interviewing. But still, there is something interesting in talking to these podcasters, and there's something to be learned about it. One more thing I want to say before I move on from this is that a celebrity's attachment to a field often binds their fates together, the fate of the field and the fate of the celebrity. So, for example, Fauci was very well known in communicable disease circles before COVID, but it took COVID to put him on the cover of Time, to be a household name, to be on Good Morning America. So Fauci's field rose, and he did. And it can happen in the opposite, right? Like I think of like Kate Moss. Remember those waif models who looked like they were sickly thin? That was a subsector of the fashion industry. When it lost cultural cachet, the practitioners in that space lost their cachet. Now, this tie creates an incentive for people to boost the fields that are the basis of their fame, but it can also create an incentive for someone to separate from their field, use their early fame as a springboard to fame in another space with better prospects for them personally, or a field that has more lasting power. So think of, for example, how George Foreman went from being a boxer to selling grilled chicken, like a TV pitchman. Or for younger people, how Jake Paul, after Vine closed, he got onto YouTube, and now he's trying his hand at boxing and other spectacle matches, right? When the field dies, you can move to another one, but there is some type of binding between a celebrity and their field. Just check the time. Any questions so far? Any comments? All right. Interesting. Use fame to judge intelligence. Oh, Tamar says she thinks we use fame to judge intelligence. Yeah, probably. But also, you know what? Not all the time. We'll get to that. That's a great point, Tamar. Let's get to it. Yen Zhan Zhang. Surprised Joe knows her as a Chinese. That's still Rob. First of all, Yen Zhan says she's surprised that I know about the Chinese actress in the upper right corner. All I did was I Googled the biggest movie star in China. I didn't know who she was either. But that was the point, was that like she's an enormous star that we've never heard of. So I'm sure she's great. Anyhow. So let's talk about becoming famous, which is what a lot of young people want to know. It's an interesting question. How do people become famous? Now, it's easy to find surface explanations for specific cases, right? We can say, oh, this actor became famous after this breakthrough role, or this singer became famous after this hit song. But developing general explanations of how to become famous requires us to have some sense of like the underlying mechanism and a sense of what fame is. Beyond renown, but like how it works. Where does human attention draw generically? Now, the literature offers a lot of explanations as to why people acquire fame, and each of them sensitizes us to a factor and suggests practical ideas of how a podcaster could acquire fame, but they all have their limits. So I want to go through five prevalent explanations in literature, and then talk about the enterprise management view that came through in my work with Ryan, and is the take that I think we're approaching with. Hold on, use cow. Okay, hold on. The first explanation of fame is probably the most common, and it's that famous people become famous for doing impressive things or for being special or outstanding. So, John Sullenberger, Sully, was famous for landing a plane in the Hudson River and saving everybody's life. Now, that's a pretty great accomplishment. And so he's famous. Or Wayne Gretzky was a great hockey player, or Jeff Bezos made a lot of money. And these types of dynamics can occur at lower levels of aggregation too, right? Like local celebrities who are stars in the local music scene, or, you know, the anchor for local TV, or the captain of the football team. My daughters know the teenager who won the local singing contest. And I remember they asked me to, you know, walk up and introduce myself as if they were real celebrities. To my daughters, they were celebrities. Let's just think about this. Okay, I'll get back to that. Now, the idea that fame is acquired by achievement suggests that to become famous, you got to do something great. You got to attain excellence in some field, and that is often how people rise to fame. That's, you know, we know of Michael Phelps because he won the gold medals. You know, we know of J.K. Rowling either because we like the story, we know she sold billions of dollars of books. Usually, the main issue with this explanation is that achievement can exist in the eye of the beholder. Like, for example, Charles Manson is very famous. You know, Ted Bundy is famous. There's a whole genre of culture that celebrates mass murderers. And I guess you could say, well, he killed a lot of people. That's an accomplishment in the field of murder. But like, it also speaks to the fact that you can construe anything as an achievement or an impressive feat, you know, including antisocial things or even trivial things. And so it's hard to use achievement as a basis for explaining how fame works in general, because you can always find something, be like, oh, they're great at that. Oh, they're great at facial expressions, you know. The second view emphasizes status and sees our relationship intertwined with our social position. So for non-sociologists, the concept of status, as I use it here, talks about people's natural proclivity to fall into pecking orders or deferential behavior. Whenever you have a sufficiently large group of people, it's sort of it's an observed behavior of people that they will organize in authority structures, informal ones. Somebody will become the boss, and everybody will start listening to the boss, or 2 or 3 people will be loud and dominant, and then everybody's going to listen to them. All right. Now, that's an informal status hierarchy, and it develops naturally. And then we have formal ones, like who becomes the president of the country or the school. So in this way, fame is a lot like high school popularity, right? People are famous, you know, if they're well known, if people think that they're popular or important in their social world. Now, the implication here is that you can acquire fame by securing a position of power or status in a community and use that as a basis to acquire fame. So, for example, we listen to Frank Wu. He's the president of our college. He's famous in our college. He's important in our college. It makes sense that we would pay attention to what he says because he's the boss. You know, he has a high status in the social system that we're embedded in. And so we pay attention to him just as we pay attention to whoever the president is now. Now, when there's turnover and somebody loses that status, often we do stop paying attention to them. We stop paying attention to the past presidents of our country or of our school, right? We don't listen. We might not pay attention to people who are in former positions. Now, there's merit to this view. Fame can accrue to high status people. That much we know. When somebody becomes a CEO or a big shot, we do pay attention to them. And fame can confer status, like we might respect somebody or defer to them because we know they're famous or popular. But it is not necessarily a great explanation, or it doesn't give us a great guide for how somebody low status can acquire fame. And we know that happens, right? We know it happens all the time. Most people who are famous did not walk into that position. It was built. And so how? So that's the limit of it. It's interesting. It sensitizes us to the idea that fame relationships can be in a status hierarchy, but it does not give us a lot of explanation as to how. Hype is a third path to fame. The idea with hype is that you spread information about somebody, tell everybody about something, either through advertisements or public relations, publicity. The limit of this is hype promotion can be an important part of a strategy to acquire fame, but there are many instances in which somebody is hyped and audiences don't take to the person. So, and the person's celebrity doesn't exist beyond the hype, beyond somebody paying for their exposure. So hype can generate exposures, but it can't guarantee that someone will attach or engage with a person and become a celebrity, follow them. The fourth is charisma. It's rooted in the Greek words for charm and beauty. And what this is like the Max Weber conception. Hold on. Conception of, having an undefinable draw, an indefinable allure. Charisma can involve appearances, like John Hamm is a very, very handsome man, but it's more than that. A lot of charismatic people are able to transmit a magnetic quality. A charisma is like something that draws people to them. And it can be in their character. It can be in their manner, their way of speaking. It doesn't have to be in their appearance. Now, there's a lot of research on what makes somebody charismatic in the field of leadership studies. And there's a general agreement that the literature hasn't really gone far past laundry lists of things like, aggressive, attractive, intelligent, and so on. There's the literature that I've seen hasn't developed like a real defined sense of what charisma is, how it's generated, how it affects people, but rather it's treated like a residual category. Oh, this person's loved, therefore they have charisma. Now let's find out what the essence of that charisma is. So sometimes it's not a meaningful guide. The last one is the last one in the literature is an interesting one. And it's the view of celebrities as a symbol. And it comes from Jeff Alexander. And the idea here is that celebrities or famous people we use as stand-ins to represent institutions or organizations or ideals or movements or communities. So, for example, the idea would be like when we celebrate Marx, we're not actually celebrating Marx. We might be celebrating, socialist ideals or anti-capitalist sentiment, or we might, identify with intellectualism. There is the celebrities, the people we follow as celebrities, they might be sort of personifications of abstract things, and we interact with the people as if they're who we're communing with, but we're using them as a means of affirming our fidelity or our adherence to an identity or an ideal or something like that. And then finally, this is the view that is coming through in our research, I think. And Ryan, maybe you'll disagree with me. Ryan's looked at the empirical work. He's not really working on this paper. He's working on something else. But I find that when we talk to the micro celebrities, they look to us like person-centered mass communications enterprises. By a mass communications enterprise, I mean it's like a project or an organization that's focused on disseminating content or information, and it's person-centered.
I'm feeling much better than yesterday.
Hold on, I'm going to do that. It's person-centered. So the enterprise is branded by an individual identity as opposed to an abstract one. So instead of Vox Media, it says Recline, right? Instead of, Happy Madison Productions, it's Adam Sandler. There's often, for larger celebrities and smaller ones, there's often multiple people who are working to create that single image. It's a full enterprise. Like for Jennifer Lopez, for example, she has tons of employees, all of whom play a role in creating Jennifer Lopez as we recognize her in popular culture. There's publicists, personal trainers, assistants, and they're working on things like physical appearance or her performance and things like that. That's a whole team. That's an organization. Like if you look at the flow of work and the people involved, it looks like an organization. And so one way that I've come to see celebrity is it's like a person branded enterprise. And I get this sense, you can get this sense when you talk to people in a lot of ways. One is when we talk to respondents, there's a detachment from fame. It's not something like you expect to be, I love fame, but usually they have sort of a cynical view of it. They're like, yeah, it's part of the job. We need followers. but my sense was is that I don't recall meeting respondents who were like, oh, I love fame. I love the love that I get. They express an appreciation for being followed, an appreciation for people who consume their products, and a desire to serve them and satisfy them as any business would its customer base. But the personal attachment at least struck me as not being there. We talked about how there's multiple people involved, and that happens even with micro celebrities. They have subcontractors working on aspects of their communication, like a website, or their social media. We've been in organizations that hire writers. There's one that I can think of that hired writers. So what came out of the person's mouth wasn't their own speech. They hired somebody. Fame is generally not a means, but it's often a means, but not an end. I think that's self-explanatory. And more importantly, when we look at how fame is built, it looks a lot like a business. They have a target market in mind. They're aware of where they are. They try to create products that satisfy them, build a fidelity, a loyal following, and they're always trying to sell and promote their franchise to audiences. So the way that the micro celebrities that we've observed strike me is they look like entrepreneurs, and they seem to talk about their work as if they were entrepreneurs, even when they're the product. Like there's some separation. Ryan, do you have anything to say? You want to disagree or anything like that? Or
no, I think we've talked about this. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, of course, and I think the one other thing I would add, I think maybe you're going to get to this, I don't know, is that the technology, what's different about the celebrity today is that a lot of the people we spoke to, they were kind of cultivating relationships with their communities, right? Yeah. Which is very different than movie stars of the past that were just on the silver screen and you had no contact with. These celebrities were able to communicate directly with them, have them as Patreons supporting them. It's a very more kind of relational experience as a celebrity. And I think that that's partly why they didn't want to be grand celebrities for the whole world. They really just wanted status within their communities there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Oh, because that's
totally I thought you
were
going to get to it.
Yeah, totally. It's good. All right. Let's talk about uses of fame. I'm going to be really quick because I realize I'm running out of time and I want to have a lot of time for discussion. How do people use fame? There are 4 types of discussions about how fame is deployed that we've come across or that have come up in our discussions. The first are psychic rewards. So I think a lot of aspiring celebrities think about they're young people. They think about esteem, impressing their friends, getting the love of strangers, feeling wanted, and things like that. And the micro celebrities who we interviewed, they do feel esteem. They are flattered that people follow them. They are very grateful, but like I said, it feels very much like that the investment is lower than you might expect. They do enjoy fame if it's part of an activity that they enjoy or that's a creative outlet. And for some people, fame can be a mixed blessing. I had a discussion. First of all, I'm going to talk about it. Earlier this week, I did a podcast with Carrie Ferris, who's one of sociology's leading sociologists of fame. And she said in her work, a lot of female news anchors, for example, they get harassed. They don't like it. They have people come up to them at dinner, when they're at a restaurant to interrupt. And it's unpleasant or it makes you feel unsafe. And so renown can be a mixed blessing. And for some people, it's just like it's a fact of life that they have to deal with given the type of work they do. They're in a communication-centric line of work. And this is like the price you have to pay. It's not unlike, for example, what a professor might feel like if somebody interrupts their dinner, in the cafeteria while they're having friends, if they were to get a steady stream of that. You're grateful, you're accessible, but it can be too much. There are instances where it can be too much and even threatening. The second reason is money. And my sense is that fame is not easy to monetize. Monetize is the word that they use, converting fame into money. And it's really quite difficult. And even people who are quite famous, they've reported, modest incomes. A lot of people who I thought were quite famous had day jobs, or they had other sources of income. Fame in and of itself, even when you're well known, might not lend itself to making much money unless you're extremely famous. And often it's a subordinate motive anyways. Like I think there are many creators, they know how they could become more popular. There are ways that you could easily create an enterprise that is more popular by doing something controversial or taking up topics that are, taboo or whatever. But like, people don't want to, because fame is often not the main goal. What is valuable to a lot of our respondents is status and group membership. There are some creators who are a lot like academics. You know how academics, they love sociology. They want to build sociology. They want to meet other sociologists. They want to become respected in the field of sociology. So those type of dynamics occur in a lot of areas of interest, from comic books to like vacation theme park, timeshare, whatnot. Like, there's all sorts. And we've run into creators who look a lot like professors on, esoteric subjects that don't fit neatly into an academic discipline, but they're still very serious about it. And a lot of those dynamics exist. The last thing that celebrity is thought to be useful for is influence. And celebrity can give you the power of exposure. It gives you the power to deliver a message to someone. But research into celebrity endorsers shows that it's more complicated than that. Audiences evaluate celebrities as if they were like they do other people in their lives. They evaluate how much they trust a celebrity, how competent they think a celebrity is to comment or make an appraisal of an object that they're speaking about. And they'll listen to them as they would any other person in their life. So, for example, if Tom Hanks says, go get your COVID vaccine, there are people who might reject, not everybody will listen to Tom Hanks, even if they like him. They might say, well, Tom Hanks has different politics from me, or Tom Hanks is not a medical professional. So people are thoughtful in how they evaluate the influence of celebrities. Let's see. All right. Finally, last topic, and then we'll open it up to discussions. Got to have a good time. Let's take a moment to talk about the death of celebrity and cancellation. Now, George Patton famously said, all glory is fleeting. And it is, because fame decays as soon as it's secured. You will find that, I think my sense of our interactions with our respondents and my experience in running podcasts is that keeping the attention of somebody, keeping access to people's informational diets is a constant job. People lose interest in you as soon as they stop getting rewards for following you, for engaging with you. And so staying relevant is a task that somebody is always having to do, or else fame will naturally decay. Why does fame decay? There's a lot of views on that. First is, it is believed that human attention draws to novelty. And so the first time you see something, you pay attention to it, it's noteworthy. But the more you see something, the less you pay attention to it. And that can work with people as well. Sometimes contextual changes affect the relevance of the field. So Fauci is famous during COVID. At the end of COVID, will as many people be interested in Fauci? Probably not, because the relevance of the field has declined, right? And often when somebody breaks through and becomes famous, it's because the salience of their field is peaking and there's somebody important in it. Like, it's sort of at a local maximum of public interest in what they do is when you'll break out. But as soon as you do, it's already declining. News cycles turn, new topics come up. And even though audiences might like someone, they become less relevant they spend less time and they forget. Celebrities can also lose influence or impact in a field, like an aging athlete, somebody who loses their position. And there's also just interference of new data. So cognitive researchers say that we forget because every new piece of information that we receive interferes with the recall of old stuff. And so just by going through your day and seeing things, it's going to push what you watched last night on TV and the person who was featured in it out of your cognition, from your, the forefront of your mind to the deep recesses of your memory. Now, how can you slow the fade? How can people stay relevant? Well, often people try to refresh their fame by doing something new or different. But if you're not doing something new, and if you're not moving to a new field, then one way that the fade can be slowed is by something that Candy and colleagues call cultural encoding. So what happens is there are two stages in a celebrity's descent into obscurity. There is first the fall from active engagement. So right now we actively engage with Fauci because he's an important figure in government and has expertise on an important issue that is concerning us now. And so we will pay attention to Fauci now. That's active engagement. As COVID becomes less relevant politically or to you personally, you're just going to stop paying attention. And that's the first fall. But you will still remember Fauci. There'll still be talk of Fauci. You'll watch, CNN's Remember COVID special, and it'll have Fauci in it. But over time, everything related to Fauci falls from memory. The people who remember Fauci die off, and people fall into obscurity, unless you have like an institution that's constantly bringing you back, like the church brings back Jesus, right? Or like, the federal government brings back memories of all of our old presidents. So one way to culturally encode what happens is, while you're popular, if you can be inserted into other pieces of information or cultural objects, then those objects' persistence might carry you, might keep your celebrity alive for a little longer. So for example, John Sullenberger landed the plane in the Hudson, and he was very, very famous for a few weeks, a few news cycles. But then Tom Hanks made a movie about him. He encoded the story of Sullenberger into a Hollywood film. And that pulls out Sullenberger's notability for several more years, right? We don't forget about him, in part because there's a movie. That movie's on a Netflix catalog. It's available, at a rental. Well, there's no more rental stores, but you can buy it on iTunes or whatever. So the existence of the movie encodes Sullenberger's presence in the culture. And the more somebody's encoded, the more stuff that's made about them, the longer they stay. But eventually everybody gets forgotten. One thing that we found in our work also is that isn't mentioned in the literature, but something that I've thought about is high involvement followers. Now, there are certain members of your audience who can develop a very, very deep bond with a franchise. And I would say a lot of our podcasters are very, very aware of them. They call them like my core audience, or, my fans, or things like that. But what they are talking about audience members who have a high degree of interest and attachment to the person. They follow them, they interact with them, whatever. Those people can act in the same way that cultural encoding does. They will stick around with a franchise longer. They will try new things that the franchise offers. And sometimes they'll even create derivative content, right? Like if I like your show and I tweet about it, or I tweet about every episode, then like I'm encoding your content on my Twitter feed. I'm reminding people. And in a sense, I'm working as a cultural encoding agent for you. And high involvement audiences are very, very important to a lot of producers. They talk about them, they cater to them, they're at the forefront of their mind. This is whatever, I'll get it. And then one last thing. The topic of cancellation comes up once in a while, and cancellation is interesting. So what cancellation is? It's often it's a social movement that is trying to encourage people to stop following or boycotting content that features a particular celebrity who is perceived to have transgressed some type of moral red line, right? So, for example, so if you take a look on the left, these are conservative people who, in conservative circles are said to have been canceled for their opposition to liberal views. And on the right, there's a cartoon about the 1619 Project and questions about critical race theory becoming banned. These are two examples of cancellation where somebody is engaged in some method to try to prevent people from consuming products, trying to get people's shows delisted, trying to decode them from the cultural memory. Try to get Aziz Ansari's shows off of Netflix, unfollow his whatever, a lot of this is a political discourse. A lot of people who are being canceled appear to be using it as part of a campaign to hype a new cultural or a new production outlet. So, for example, there's a professor, Brett Weinstein, who was chased off campus for some type of, I think it was like an opposition to some diversity program at his school. And he famously, in conservative circles, was said to have gotten canceled for speaking out to PC culture. Now, he was talking about getting canceled, but in the process, he got a ton of exposure. He would beat the drum of cancellation. Now he has a very profitable podcast. He's actually earning a good amount of money. And I don't know. It's hard to differentiate the act of being canceled from like the act of hyping a new enterprise, because it's a great line to do it. True cancellation, though, is far more difficult today than in the past. It used to be that you could blackball somebody, but now that makes no sense. I mean, in a world where Nazis can run TV and radio stations, because they can effectively on YouTube or by running a podcast or running a blog, anybody can run anything. There's far less regulation than there ever was, and I just don't believe in this cancellation. But what it is interesting is it shows that they're attacking the basis, the economic basis, or the influence base of a person by encouraging people to unfollow them and decode them from the culture. So that is the end of sort of our look at fame. How do you get it? How do you use it? How do you keep it? If you enjoyed this talk, check out an episode from this Monday of my podcast, the Annex Sociology podcast. It features Carrie O'Ferris, and we talk about celebrity. She's a very accomplished researcher and an expert. She's a very funny woman. You can get it on iTunes or Spotify, or you can just ask your smart speaker to play the latest episode of the Annex Sociology podcast. If you do this week or next week, you'll get that episode. And then one more sort of message before we go to Q&A. This is just for the Queen's Podcast Lab series. Thank you for joining us on the Queen's Podcast Lab learning series. These are free educational products or resources rather, brought to you by the state and city of New York. These are your tax dollars at work. We create free public resources and non-commercial scholarly media content. And if you'd like to support the work we do, visit our website, queenspodcastlab.com, and click donate. Your tax-deductible donation to our project through the Department of Sociology will not only help us, but students. All right. And now let's, are there any questions? Anna Bounds, did I see your hand up?
Hi, Joe. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed your discussion, and your PowerPoint, your slide deck was very effective, and it's just all over. Congrats on this. I think that this is, given our interest in social media, our current culture, this is right on time. I have a question for you. Well, first, let me say this. I was listening to a podcast last week that reminded me of your discussion, and it's a Jason Bateman's podcast. It's called Smartless, and basically they're talking about the arc of fame within Hollywood, and they say it starts off with, "Who is Joe Cohen? Get me Joe Cohen. Who is Joe Cohen?" Right? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's a little bit longer than that, but that's essentially the essence. So my question to you is, I was wondering if you could share a quotation. Maybe this is for both you and Ryan. Some kind of interesting quote, remarkable quotation or insight that someone had that shared with you in your interviews. I'd be particularly interested in someone from social media, but
I should come armed. I should have come armed with quotes. So that's some good advice. I'm trying to think, like, on what topic. What are you thinking of?
Well, their experience, their experience. Like, I'll speak from my own perspective. I appreciated the comment that you made about female anchors and the kind of harassment and interest that they get. Because one of the things that I'm noticing is that I have people contact me through social media, with, given, my work on prepping, who are kind of creepy. They're not creepy because, they're preppers, they're creepy guys, that sort of thing. So I was wondering,
that aspect is not part of my study. That was from Carrie Ferris's work. She was interviewing local celebrities, and she found those views were expressed to her by local media people. But yeah, listen, probably any professor here has a similar experience, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I just was thinking about, like, the idea of, like, the slow fade, or I guess my interest is with social media people, celebrities. Is their notion of fame different? Because it seems so extraordinary, fleeting, and a lot of pressure to kind of keep on the stage. Like you said, it's so hyped. Everything is, and it's so hyped up. Even you said that in your presentation. I guess I think you're just right on the mark about that.
I'll tell you. So what's interesting is I can tell you on the fleetingness of fame and how they value it. The one that the reaction, the paradigmatic reaction that stands out in my mind, we were interviewed, and it's funny, it comes through in facial expressions more than the text of the words themselves. But I remember where I got this insight, or where it was pressed on me the most. We were interviewing a well-regarded podcaster who specializes in a major theme park and all things related to a major theme park in Florida. And so it's well established in that space. And we were talking about, the experience of being followed. And it was funny, it was almost like almost like a condescending smile, not condescending to me, but more of like a smile of being gracious. He was like, "Yes, I'm very grateful for all of the people who follow me," but it's like a pro forma answer. It's much like we would say, "Yes, I'm very happy that people are engaging with my work and whatever," but we didn't get a sense of, Ryan, maybe you can tell me if you agree with this. We never got somebody said, "Oh, I love hearing from the fans," like in an emotional way, or talking about it. Usually they were talking about their business and what they had to do to keep it going. And the love of the fans was discussed as a means to an end, or as a necessary step in accomplishing their goals, whether it was to become, the top producer of podcasts in a comic book subgenre space, or to make a lot of money, or to, it seemed like there were other goals, and that people were more magnanimous, but not needy for the fame that they had. That was my impression, at least. Ryan, do you have anything on that, or anything to comment on that, or?
No, we have to, be clear that our sample was kind of mid-level podcasters, right? Yeah. But they still had a substantial following. But they weren't really concerned with being superstars. Yes. Yeah. I think they did want celebrity within their own communities again, right? Like, whether it was competing with other podcasters in the
Yeah.
crime genre, or being well known in the anime conventions when they went there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they were concerned about, right? And I think that's a little new, maybe, that you can kind of connect with a very small, select audience, right? Like that fragmentation that you talked about earlier.
I thought about your research when I was watching that new series about a podcast called Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin. Yeah,
I haven't seen that yet.
Yes, where they talk about the true crime exhibit.
Yeah.
The true crime guy, he wanted to show the other true crime podcasters, and that was interesting. Both the anime guy and the true crime guy, they were not focused on impressing members of the general public. They were focused on other people in their field. Like the anime guy, that's who I think about when I think about a real professor. That guy was a professor of anime, and he wanted to show all the other anime experts that he was right. And like his fame was more just like signaling his legitimacy or his cachet, but like he was interested in the other anime people and being a big shot in the anime circles. And the true crime guy was like that too. He wanted to show all the other true crime podcasters. He kept on talking about who he was better than and what other people think is good and stuff like that, right? But both of those,
and neither of them had any concern about money at all, it seemed to us.
None.
Yep. Part of the show's about that. It might be good for a footnote or something.
Yeah. It's a lot like being a professor. I found it a lot like these mid-level celebrities. The dynamics are very similar. There's no money. It's a very niche audience. It doesn't really, you do it because you like it. You care about your colleagues, at least. That was my impression, at least for a lot of them. Are there other comments or questions or? Well, all right. All right. So I'm going to stop the live stream. All right. Okay. We're off live